Welcome once again to the Influencers Podcast. We are here to see the influence of your life grow, that you have been equipped by your Father to be a victor. I'm my friend Scott Young here, and welcome to the Influencers Podcast. We're here to see the increase of influence in your life so that the world becomes a better place. Our co-host Dave Donaldson is out on assignment. We're always praying that the Lord uses him, but we are going to have a fascinating discussion today. You know, the Bible says in Proverbs 31 that we should speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. And we should speak for the rights of those who are destitute. And today's podcast, that's exactly what we're going to do. City Serve International, which is the sponsor of this podcast, has 10 initiatives, and one of them is to protect the vulnerable. And that includes special needs families, that includes mental health challenges, at-risk youth, and pregnant women and the unborn. And today, our guest, Seth Gruber, has focused on this with laser precision. In fact, he describes his mission in life as pricking the collective conscience of the culture and awakening the church to action in regards to pro-life issues. He has spoken face-to-face with over 500,000 people. He has started the White Rose Resistance, which we'll talk about in a few moments, and in a few months is launching a book and documentary called The 1916 Project. Seth, we're glad that you're with us today and just want to hear how you got involved in the pro-life movement.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Thanks for having me on. I mean, it was nearly 50 years before Roe versus Wade got overturned, of state-sanctioned slaughter of unborn children, legalized through point of birth, funded by the public dole for any reason or no reason at all. And most Americans and Christians have slept through what I call the abortion holocaust, which is really a litmus test of the country. And it's a litmus test of the church. Thankfully, I had parents and a mother who were not sleeping through this great evil. And my mother, in her late 20s, was directing a pregnancy resource center, one of these wonderful crisis pregnancy centers, pregnancy care clinics, whatever you want to call them, in Los Angeles County, in Azusa, California. And then she married my dad in 89. I was born in 91. And so she was waddling around the pregnancy center, 9 months pregnant with me, loving on moms and helping save babies. So I've actually been a pro-life activist since I was a fetus, long time, because obviously I was not a baby. I was just part of my mother's body, her choice, bodily autonomy, one body. Therefore, I saved those children too. But I was homeschooled through 8th grade and then went to public high school and did my senior project on abortion, saw aborted baby mutilated parts for the first time at 18 years old, first trimester, not third trimester, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 weeks old children. Detailed hands, eyeballs, nose, faces, cheeks, chins, ears, mutilated on a table, and went off to Westmont College in Santa Barbara. And started the first pro-life club at this Christian college, and found out they weren't so Christian. And they had pro-abortion professors on faculty, and they still do. They still have some pro-abortion professors on faculty. So I guess they would have lynched their savior in the womb during Advent every year, because obviously if the preborn child doesn't have a right to life, then neither did Christ in the womb. And then graduated, started speaking full-time, joined a pro-life organization, and the rest is history. Launched the White Rose Resistance right after the overturning of Roe versus Wade, and we're now the fastest growing pro-life organization in America. And I host the Seth Gruber Show, the largest pro-life podcast in the country. And there's a stirring happening, Scott, and people are awakening and recognizing that these evils we have been tolerating for so long are now getting closer and closer to home. Meaning the longer that you tolerate the injustice of one victim class, the more ground you give to that culture of death to come knock at your door one day. And so we talk a lot about at the White Rose Resistance and my podcast about how we got here. I think post-2020, post-scamdemic, Scott, a lot of people are saying, what the heck happened to my country? What is going on in America? And how did all this happen? Wow. Drag Queen Story Hour happened really quick. Cheering for third trimester abortions and infanticide legislation. That happened really quick. Threatening to take kids who are gender confused, minors, from their parents if they're not affirming of their kids' gender delusions. That happened really quick. Arresting pro-life sidewalk counselors who were singing psalms and hymns outside of an abortion center and throwing them into prison for 11 years, which is what 7 sidewalk counselors in Tennessee are facing. Wow, that doesn't sound like America. Guess what, friend? These things have been happening gradually for decades, and now they're happening suddenly, and you're wondering how it all happened. Well, we answer those questions at our organization, and we answer those questions in my film and book coming out this summer, The 1916 Project. So our goal is to end abortion. It's to prick the conscience of the culture and awaken the church to action to bring an end to the abortion holocaust. And so we educate, we discredit the opposition, and we're building a movement of resistance. However, what we recognize is that abortion is kind of the linchpin upon which the liberal establishment swings. It's kind of one of their sacraments, if you will. And so what happens when you pull out a linchpin? Well, the door falls off. And so the door of humanism has been falling off the hinges since June 24th, 2022, when Roe versus Wade was overturned. And they're manifesting their inner legions, and they're showing us who they really are, what they're willing to do to maintain power and to protect their core sacraments, which usually has to do with killing children and weird sex stuff involving kids usually. And so it's time for us to recognize what we're up against, what time it is in the culture of death, and what the duty and obligations are for believers first and foremost, and for the church to stand for life. So that's who we are. That's what we do.
Was it you were 18 and you saw these horrendous photos? Yep. Was that traumatic? How did that affect your soul?
Oh yeah, I mean, it was one of the sort of turning points of my life. And I was raised by pro-life parents, right? I mean, I couldn't have been more pro-life. And yet I'd never seen what abortion is and does to little babies in the womb. And so if I didn't know and I hadn't seen, how many people in the broader public do you think have actually seen the mutilated bodies of babies killed through abortions? Very few. It's not like CNN has ever played those images. You know what I mean? The New York Times and the Washington Post and MSNBC, and the PBS ain't going to be playing those images. So most Americans have never actually seen what abortion does. And it's easy to be pro-choice when you never have to look at what that choice looks like. It's also easy to be pro-life and do nothing about it and pay lip service to the lives of the unborn when you don't have to look at what your Lord sees 3,000 times a day in America, the emaciated, dissected, disemboweled, and dismembered limbs of his children. And so at 18 years old, that kind of changed my life. And from that point on, I knew that I'd always be doing something about this.
Now, the name of your organization, White Rose Resistance. Unpack that name. Where does it come from and what does it mean?
Yeah, the White Rose Resistance is the story. It's the history of the original White Rose Resistance in Nazi Germany. These were kids in their 20s who were standing against Hitler's regime and Third Reich. They were horrified at what was happening to the Jews, at the deterioration of freedom and liberty for Germans who didn't go along with the status quo, who didn't agree with what was happening. They loved their country. They said things like, "We are Christian and we are German, therefore we are responsible for Germany." They wrote in these leaflets, they said, "If you know, why do you not act?" And they would spread these all around major German cities trying to wake people up. And these were kids in their 20s. There was one professor involved, but they were largely all in their 20s. And in 1942, so 82 years ago, a young woman named Sophie, 21 years old, was walking the sidewalks of Munich. And she was a student at the University of Munich. And she found this leaflet on the sidewalk, and it was called Leaflets of the White Rose. And so she started reading this, and it was explicitly condemning the crimes of the Nazis and asking good people to wake up. They said in their leaflets, "Do not hide your cowardice behind the cloak of expediency." And they were calling people to wake up and engage in passive resistance and sabotage the attempts of the Third Reich to usher them into the progressive future by eliminating the unfit, the undesirables, those who didn't meet the elite's litmus test for personhood, for human value, for a right to life. You remember the Nazis, Hitler himself, they were eugenicists. They were Darwinian eugenicists. So they didn't believe that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that we're endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, that men are created equal. Darwinian eugenicists don't believe that. They believe that human rights are earned, that they're based off of function and not off of endowment. Right? When you're endowed with rights, no one can take them away. Right? They come from God, and so governments are instituted among men to recognize and protect those rights. In America, well, Hitler didn't believe that. Margaret Sanger didn't believe that. Henry Ford didn't believe that. Carnegie didn't believe that. Most of the millionaire eugenicists who funded a lot of the culture of death in the 20th century that culminated in the Third Reich, because Hitler looked to American eugenicists to craft much of the legislation that would be on the books in the Third Reich. He openly talked about this. Hitler said, I have studied with interest the laws of several American states concerning prevention of reproduction by those whose progeny would in all likelihood be of no value or be injurious to the racial stock. Heinrich Himmler said that Margaret Sanger's first board member, Lothrop Stoddard, and one of Margaret Sanger's best friends, Madison Grant, the president of the American Eugenics Society, were the two individuals most responsible for the crafting and the inspiration of the forced sterilization laws in the Third Reich, being led by Ernst Rudin, who had spoken at one of Margaret Sanger's Planned Parenthood conferences in 1925 in New York City. Heinrich Himmler said that those were the two individuals that were most responsible for the crafting of the eugenics laws that would be on the books as policy and law in the Third Reich. And so this idea that human value is not inerrant, it's not endowed, it's earned, it's based off of function. And so that opens up anyone to be eliminated, to be discriminated against, to be murdered, to be forcibly sterilized. And so the Nazis were forcibly sterilizing people before they were murdering people. People forget this. They didn't start with just like throwing Jews in concentration camps and making them take showers. They were forcibly sterilizing people. They didn't think had a right to reproduce and have children because you had bad genes. You're bad stock, and so we don't want you reproducing. This is eugenics, okay? And so they were horrified at what was happening because it wasn't just Jews that were being wiped out. Gypsies were being targeted. Homosexuals were being targeted. Polish people were being targeted, and then physically disabled people, right? People with infirmities. It seems like America sometimes when you think about, you're killing granny, 80% of babies diagnosed with Down syndrome in the womb are aborted in America. In Iceland, it's like 99%. Actually, every child killed through an abortion is a eugenics experiment because the child is called unwanted. And so they're not really a person. That's what every eugenicist believes, is that not everyone is a full person with the rights therein. The Nazis didn't say unwanted, they said undesirables. They said Lebensunwertensleben, life unworthy of life. Unworthy. Sounds like unwanted, right? So these ideas were very popular on both sides of the pond in both Europe and America for quite some time. Following the science 100 years ago meant being a eugenicist, Scott. Being a eugenicist was very popular in the halls of academia and in the halls of power and in the legislative body in America. People forget this. We inspired Hitler through our laws in America. And so this 21-year-old is just saying, enough is enough. And she read this leaflet about Christians resisting, saying no, and trying to wake people up. And so she's like, I want to join the White Rose Resistance. Well, come to find out, it was being run by her older brother, Hans, a 24-year-old young man who was trying to protect his little sister. He knew that engaging in resistance in 1942 was not a safe thing to do. And so for the rest of 1942 and the first couple months of 1943, Hans, Sophie, Christoph Probst, Alexander Schmerel, Willy Graf, Professor Kurt Hubert, and others began to write, print, and disseminate these illegal anti-Nazi leaflets. And they would take trains in the middle of the night to Frankfurt, to Berlin. They lived in Munich. And they would start doing graffiti. They would say "Down with Hitler," and the Nazis would come paint over it the next day. And this caught the attention of other people across Germany engaged in Christian resistance to wake people up. And then on February 18th, 1943, Hans and Sophie, brother and sister, kind of took things to the next level, and they walked onto the campus at the University of Munich during class time when the halls were quiet. It was a dangerous thing to do. The universities, like the churches, had largely been co-opted. And they started to drop their leaflets everywhere. And in this iconic act, right as the bell rang to release students from class, Sophie went to the third floor balcony of the University of Munich, where I was standing in December, filming for our movie. And she threw about 100 or so more leaflets she had in her pocket 3 floors down to the atrium below. So paper goes everywhere. The janitor sees what happens, calls the Gestapo, and Hans and Sophie are arrested on February 18th, 1943. They spend 4 days in prison, a 17-hour nonstop interrogation. And Sophie and Hans refuse to implicate any of their other friends or members of the White Rose Resistance. They take full responsibility. Unfortunately, they found incriminating evidence in their friend, who was a father with his wife in the hospital for a daughter he'd never meet. Christoph was implicated. And 4 days later, they had their heads chopped off. On February 22nd, 1943, they were beheaded on a guillotine. Heinrich Himmler himself, who was in town, ordered it. He did not want them hung in public. He wanted them killed secretly and quietly in order to discourage any future acts of resistance. And so the White Rose Resistance was ended. The prison guards allowed them to meet with their parents right before they were killed. And Sophie said something in her final hours that has come to encapsulate much of my life and the DNA of our ministry, because she recognized, like we need to recognize today, Scott, that evil people do evil things. Stop being surprised by that, church. That's not unprecedented. What's unprecedented is the silence and cowardice of Christians who know better and ought to be doing something. And so here's a 21-year-old who's speaking prophetically, I believe, through our organization to the church today. She said, you know, the real damage is caused by all of those millions out there who just want to survive. It's the honest men and women who just want to be left in peace. You know, those who don't want their little lives disturbed by anything bigger than themselves. Those with no sides and no causes. Those who won't take measure of their own strength for fear of antagonizing their own weaknesses. Those who don't like to make waves or enemies. You know, those for whom freedom, honor, truth, and principles, it's just words, it's just literature. Those who live small, die small. It's the reductionistic approach to life. You see, if you keep it small, you'll keep it under control. If you don't make any noise, the boogeyman won't find you. But it's all an illusion, because they die too. Those people who roll up their spirits into tiny little balls so as to be safe. Safe, said Sophie. From what? Life is always on the edge of death. Narrow streets lead to the same place as wide avenues, and a little candle burns itself out, just like the flaming torch does. But I choose my own way to burn. Well, that doesn't sound like a 21-year-old. That sounds like G.K. Chesterton or Winston Churchill. And as she was escorted from her prison cell to the chopping block, she said, how can we expect righteousness to prevail when there's hardly anyone willing to give themselves up individually to a righteous cause? Such a fine sunny day, and I have to go now. But what does my death matter if through us, thousands of people are awakened and stirred to action? And then they had their heads chopped off. And so while rose blossoms may perish in the fall, they always reappear in the spring. And while all of the members of the White Rose Resistance were found and executed, their sacrifice has planted the good seeds of resistance in the hearts of millions today. whose actions will keep alive the legacy of the White Rose Resistance. We are the fastest growing pro-life organization in America, intent on fulfilling the vision Hans and Sophie had to prick the conscience of the culture, awaken the church to action, to mobilize and engage in resistance against the culture of death before it's too late. And the same ideologies that created the mile-high body of mutilated Jews and Polish people, the same ideology that created the insanity and wickedness of the Holocaust in Germany, are alive and well and with us today in America. Ideas have consequences, and bad ideas have victims. And the longer that you tolerate bad ideas, you make peace with them. And you say, well, those ideas won't come home to roost. They won't knock at my door. My life isn't being targeted by evil. The longer you make peace and accept the status quo of the culture of death in America, which is spinning out of control, the sooner you will find that one day that evil does come to knock at your door, and your way of life and your comfort is now being affected by evil ideas that you made peace with for so long. The church was supposed to hold the line, promoting righteousness, withholding wickedness, and standing for the cause of the orphan, the widow, the fatherless, the voiceless, the enfranchised, the targeted, the oppressed. And we have not done that in America. We're asleep at the wheel. We've been caught with our lamps not burning anymore. And so we're waking up the church in America, Scott, to engage in Christian resistance once again, to bring a grinding halt to the culture of death in America before it's too late.
For those that are listening, I can see Seth because I'm talking and I can see him visually. Seth knows his stuff. He's not reading off some sheets. He is immersed in this subject, and it's like opening a fire hydrant, and it just comes out. He is speaking from his memory, all the facts, all the figures, because he's passionate about this issue. And let me ask Seth, as a pro-life advocate, what do you say to those that say, well, this is just a woman's right to choose? What's your answer to the culture that just blatantly says you have no business to speak to me?
When does women's rights begin, and where do these rights come from? So wait a second. So women have rights. Okay. So they have bodily autonomy rights. Okay. What does that mean? Well, it means the right to kill whatever. It means the right to kill babies in the womb. That's what bodily autonomy rights mean. That's what reproductive health care means. So okay. So women have this right to abortion. So where does this right come from? Pro-choicer. Where does the right to abortion come from? Is it a positive right, meaning a legal right? Because if abortion is a legal right, then the abortion activist cannot really complain if the state does not permit her an abortion, because the same government that grants rights can take them away. Okay. It's not a legal right, pro-choicer, because you believe that it's a right even if the law makes it illegal. Okay, so what kind of right is this right to kill a child in the womb through point of birth? Like, you could be dilating. You need to understand, this is the position of the Democrat Party. This is the position of the DNC. Okay? Pull up the platform. You're offended by that, Christian? I don't care. Pull up the platforms and compare the GOP with the DNC. By the way, I hate the GOP. It's full of cowards. I rip them all the time. But compare the party platforms. The Democrat Party's platform is abortion through point of birth, funded by the taxpayer, whether you like it or not. Okay? Okay, so I guess it's a natural right then, because this is a right that pro-choicers say that exists whether state or federal governments recognize it and protect it as such, Scott. Okay, so it's a natural right. What's a natural right? A natural right is a right that springs from your human nature. A natural right is a right you have in virtue of being human. Right? When we talk about the right to life, the right to property, right? The right to free speech, like these are rights that exist simply because you're a human being. You're not an animal. You have speech, you have language, you have rationality. You're a different kind of creature. You've been created in the image of God, is what the Bible says. It's what the founders believed. So humans have rights that other creatures and forms of life don't have. So one of those being the right to life. So if abortion is a natural right, a right that exists simply because you're a human being, then the abortion advocate had that right from the moment they became a human being, the moment of conception. So as Hadley Arcus points out, we're left with an amusing paradox. According to the logic of abortion advocates, unborn women don't have a right to life, but they do have a right to an abortion.
Wow. So what do the unusual cases of rape and incest that also become part of the argument? What do you say there?
Yeah, any pro-lifer that supports abortion in the case of rape is weak and not really pro-life. You don't get to kill Timmy because daddy did something wrong. You don't murder children for the crimes of their father. I have more compassion for the rape victim than the pro-choicer does. Pro-lifers writ large have more compassion for the victim of sexual assault, for the victim of rape, than the pro-choicer does. I'll prove it right now. Pro-choicers are largely on the left, right? You've got some Tommy Larens and people who say they're conservative and support abortion, but obviously they're a joke. Pro-choicers are largely on the left. Pro-choicers overwhelmingly vote Democrat. Pro-choicers are largely progressive. They're secularists. They're secular humanists. Pro-choicers, and I'll tell you, as someone who speaks on university campuses, let me tell you, there is a mold that most pro-choicers fit into. Most pro-choicers, being progressive, do not support harsh prison sentences like conservatives do. The same policies that pro-choicers support help spring criminals from the clink. Show me a pro-choice movement that supports life in prison or castration or the death penalty for rapists. I don't really meet them. Guess who does support life in prison, the death penalty, or castration for rapists? Me. And broad swaths of the pro-life movement. Not all pro-lifers, but most pro-lifers want that rapist in jail for life, at least, Scott. I'm willing to entertain castration for rapists, okay? Who has more compassion for the victim of rape? Pro-lifers. Because we want to see justice, and we want to ensure that that rapist is never allowed to touch another woman again. I have more compassion for that woman. But the way they use the rape argument is to make pro-lifers look like the moral monster, right? You would force her to have a baby conceived in rape. No, I'm not forcing her to. The rapist did. What I'm saying is that you don't get to murder children for the crimes of their father. By the way, abortion is wrong for the same reason that rape is wrong. Why is rape wrong? It's an intentional act of violence on an innocent human being without any justification. Why is abortion wrong? It's an intentional act of violence on an innocent human being without any justification. So abortion doesn't unrape a woman. It commits another act of violence to allegedly solve an act of violence. That's not compassionate. That's not loving. What's loving is throw him in jail for life, maybe cut his testicles off, and let that child be born. Lastly, for people who support abortion in the case of rape, why don't you go talk to my friends who were conceived in rape, who are pro-life speakers and pro-life activists, and tell them they should have been murdered in the womb?
So then bring us to the project that's going to be launched in a few months, the 1916 project. Unpack that for us so people can be watching for it, and I don't know how they'll connect with it. Maybe you can tell us how that happens.
Yeah, we're about to launch the website for the movie and the book and the screening tour, but it's probably the most unique pro-life film or project that's ever been done. It's called the 1916 Project. The book goes to pre-order the middle of May, and it ships in August. And the film goes on a screening tour around the country the middle of June through the first week of September, and then you can stream it online in September. But you can only watch it this summer live and in person. So hundreds of churches will probably be doing screenings of the film. I'll be doing about maybe a 8 or 9 church tour between June and September in big churches all around America. Those dates will be released on our website soon. So the whiterose.life, in a few months, in a few weeks here, you'll be able to access the 1916 landing page there. So that's our website, the whiterose.life. But it's the story of the secular moral revolution. It answers the question, how did we get here? It kind of threads the various aspects of our kooky, out of control culture of death to show and prove how interconnected the culture of death is in America, from abortions to the sexualization of children in public schools through comprehensive sexuality education. Y'all might have seen all the mama bears and papa bears, all the moms and dads speaking at school board meetings in the last 2-3 years. They're very upset. Why are they very upset, Scott? Because of obscene pornographic sex ed in the school library, but not just the school library, Scott. It's often in the sex ed health curriculum that's mandated to be taught in K through 12. That's what they're upset about. Where does that come from? It comes from Planned Parenthood. It comes from Planned Parenthood, actually, back in the 60s. Planned Parenthood boasts on their own website that they're the largest provider of sex education in America. So let me just be very clearly here. It's Baal and Asherah all over again. In Judges 6, God tells Gideon, tear down the altars to Baal and Asherah. Asherah, goddess of sex, who would sexualize a community, and they would engage in weird orgies and sex stuff. Sounds like most Democrats and secular progressives in America today. Baal, they would sacrifice babies to Baal. So you've got the god of child sacrifice and the goddess of sex. What are the two pagan gods of our culture in America today, Scott, if not child sacrifice and sex? Weird sex stuff and abortions. But what happens when you do lots of weird sex stuff and you sleep around and you do whatever you want? What happens? You get pregnant. And so as it was in Judges 6, so it is today. Sexualize a community, they'll eventually kill their children. Do you think it's a coincidence, listener? Do you think it's a coincidence that Planned Parenthood, who is the largest abortion provider in the world, boasts on their own website that they're the largest provider of sex education in America? Asherah and Baal. You got to sexualize the kids in the next generation first so that they'll kill their kids. And the same organization profits on both ends. Oh, and Planned Parenthood today is the second largest provider of cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers. You heard that right. The largest abortion provider in the world, Planned Parenthood, is now the second largest provider of transgender drugs to gender-confused children and adults. So they don't stay in their abortion lane. They see gender-affirming healthcare as an integral part of their reproductive healthcare mission as the largest abortion provider. Oh, it's almost like all these things go together. How did that happen? Help me understand that. Well, my movie and book does that. It's a full-length documentary. The book goes deeper. The book is for those intellectual ADD people like me who are hungry to know more and are curious. It'll answer more questions. And so catch the film on our tour around the country this year. Some of the places we'll be in will be Virginia, Phoenix, Southern California. Where else? Nashville. And we're booking a bunch more cities right now. Hopefully be in the Pacific Northwest, in the Atlanta area. But actually hundreds of churches will be screening it. So you'll be able to catch churches that are screening it. I'll just be at only about 9 of those big ones. And it features Eric Metaxas, Pastor Jack Hibbs, John Amanchukwu, Bishop Wooden, Dr. George Grant, Bill Federer, and Nancy Pearcey, and myself. And so, it's a play on the 1619 Project, which allegedly said this is how America became so bigoted, racist, and evil, is the heritage of slavery. And so every institution and aspect of American culture has been rotted by the legacy of slavery in America, which goes back to 1619 when the first black slaves come to American shores. Wrong. The 1619 Project is not about that. Their essays, their podcasts, and their K through 12 curriculum talk about reparations, abortion, defunding the police, and removing the right to bear arms. It's just a liturgical discipleship training series for the religion of humanism to inculcate the next generation with their pagan worldview. That's all it is. And it's to make people hate America. But they allegedly were answering the question, how did America become so bigoted, racist, and evil today? Why should you hate America? Go back to 1619 to get all your answers. No. You actually go back to 1916 to get all your answers, to understand how America became so sexually crazy and evil, where the legacy of 1916 has swept through every nook and cranny of American culture. The legacy of 1916 is impacting every facet of American culture today, because that's when Margaret Sanger, the patron saint of feminism and the most successful cultural Marxist and leftist revolutionary of the last 115 years, opened up the first brick and mortar Planned Parenthood clinic in the Brownsville section of New York in 1916, an area heavily populated by Black, Slavs, Italians, and Jews, those that she defined as unfit to reproduce. The first brick and mortar Planned Parenthood clinic in 1916. That event, that date, that physical unfolding of what was previously just her ideology began to take shape into the revolutionary organization that is the largest, best funded, and most profitable 501c3 in human history, Planned Parenthood.
Well, friends, you had to listen hard today to catch everything that Seth Gruber said, but you can watch his shows on YouTube, I think. If they Google
YouTube,
your name,
Rumble,
they'll find
iTunes podcast, Spotify. You can watch the show. You can tune in, and it's called The Seth Gruber Show.
And you heard him talk about his website, which is thewhiterose.life. So to connect with Seth and to further your involvement in this cause, if you want to be an influencer, protecting the vulnerable, Seth, we do want to thank you. Thank you for joining us today. We appreciate your time. And to all those that have been part of the Influencers podcast today, you probably need to go back and listen to this again to catch everything that Seth said. Thank you so very much. I'm Scott Young. That's the Influencers podcast for today.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Influencers podcast on the Charisma Podcast Network.
If you enjoy our content, we would love for you to subscribe and have the opportunity to tune in to future podcasts. You can follow us on all social media platforms at the Influencers Podcast Official. You can stay up to date, hear more inspiring content, and unlock your full potential as an influencer.
Remember to use your influence to create lasting change that draws the world closer to Jesus.